Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our kickoff, our monthly meeting to drink a cup of tea together, as usual, and to have a conversation on sustainability topics. This time, I am very happy to have with us Greg Norris. Greg Norris was a professor at University of Harvard, but still more important, is the director of the Shine project that is in connection with the development and implementation of one very innovative approach, that is the handprint. We said that Greg is the director of the Shine project, and in particular, this project wants to promote the idea of the handprint. This is the positive view in direction of carbon or the climate change. All of us probably already know the carbon footprint, but Greg today will explain us this other dimension, this other side of the coin. So, Greg, the floor is yours.
Daniele, thank you very much. And thanks, Lorenzo, as well, for helping organizing all this and probably other people behind the scenes organizing things. And thanks to everyone who's joined. I'm looking forward to a great discussion here. I'll just take us briefly through some slides and stop in plenty of time to just take 10 minutes to share these ideas with slides, and I look forward to a nice discussion. Okay, so as you say, Daniela, I think we're all familiar with footprints, everyone on this call, and most people worldwide at this point. It tends to be how we frame the challenge of becoming more sustainable. If you think about it, if you ask yourself, how do I become more sustainable? You immediately ask, well, let's see, how can I shrink my footprint? And if you ask, well, how is this company, what are they doing about sustainability? You want to know, how are they reducing their footprint? My university sustainability office is largely about calculating, reporting, and reducing its footprint. And so this is really how we still approach and frame the challenge of sustainability. And it's a good thing, but it's incomplete, as we'll see. We all also know that footprints seem to be comprehensive. For many years, I thought they were. Scope 1 is our direct emissions. Scope 2, carbon footprint, emissions from the purchased electricity and energy. And in fact, many times you'll hear people refer to Scope 3 as everything else. So if we have a Scope 3, which is everything else, then clearly nothing's missing. At least that's what we think. But I'm going to hopefully open your eyes to that. We sometimes, there's a saying that no person is an island, meaning that we're all connected. And it's true for life cycles. It's true for organizations. Think about it. The function of the product may influence the environment. And then when we purchase a product or when we sell a product, we're causing something else to not be purchased and used. There's also many cases where the life cycle of one product interacts with the life cycles of other products, and so on. We're going to actually look at each of these examples here today in one at a time. But I think if I had to give you an example of what's the difference between a footprint perspective and a perspective where we include the handprint, there's a concept that we have in English. It dates back apparently to the 1500s in England, where everyone brings some food to a meal, and you call it a potluck because you're not sure what you're going to get. Everyone brings things, and certainly a goal of this meal is that there's enough food for everyone. Now, this requires that everyone should bring something delicious and they share it. We need people to bring what they're good at, but we also need nobody to eat too much. It seems to me that our approach to sustainability, where we focus strictly on reducing our own footprint, is like going to a potluck and saying, well, the most important thing is to eat as little as possible. And it is important to not take more than your share, but it's also important to bring good food. And handprints are about what do you bring to the party, whereas footprint reduction is making sure you don't eat too much. Okay, let's look at some of these examples. A company, some companies, for example, Edwards makes abatement equipment, pollution abatement equipment. Their equipment is essential at significantly reducing the carbon footprint of semiconductor manufacturing because it abates or destroys emissions that otherwise are very powerful, CFCs, HCFCs, very powerful greenhouse gases. If they make and sell more of their equipment, and all they're doing is right now they have to report their footprint. If they double their output, is that really a bad thing environmentally? That's what we currently see when we look at a report, their environmental reports, which tell us all about their footprint, but actually miss this abatement, is being accomplished when their products are used. Or consider something which we call avoided emissions. If you sell a high efficiency appliance, this is a high efficiency shower head from Kohler. It's actually the kind that we have installed, and it's wonderful. It uses way less water than the usual shower heads. And the savings of energy and water over the life cycle of the product are much larger than the footprint of making it. And yet those savings are not reported in the carbon footprint of the organization or the product. And so this is called avoided emissions, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has developed some guidelines. They're actually being updated this summer, and they'll be released next month, I think. But we have guidelines for how to calculate the emissions that are avoided when you sell what's called a solution, a product that is better than the most likely alternative. But next, let's look at how products might, if you think about it, the avoided emissions are the impacts on the footprint of the user relative to some hypothetical situation which didn't happen. But now let's look at how products are affecting the footprints of other products that are in use. I love this example. This device up here is called an air curtain. When the door is open, it blows the air down, and this air blowing down is blown down fast enough that it significantly reduces airflow through the door while the door is open. So the life cycle has a footprint, but it's also reducing the footprint of the building. And yet those benefits are not appearing anywhere in the footprint of the product or in the footprint of the company. Instead, when we evaluate the impacts that the company that makes these air curtains is having, we ask, well, how can they reduce the footprint of their products? And if they sell twice as many of these and ultimately reduce the human footprint in a large extent, all we'll see is that, well, they're polluting more. So it's a limited view. And this has led us to define the concept of a handprint. So a handprint is the impacts of your presence measurable with footprint metrics, but outside of your footprint or not included in your footprint calculation. This can include reductions that you create in the footprints of others, like we've been seeing. It can also reflect beneficial impacts that you cause that are measurable in footprint units. A great example there would be if you plant some trees. Those trees will absorb carbon dioxide, and that will be a beneficial impact in footprint units, kilograms of CO2. We would call that also a handprint. So basically, the question is, how else am I impacting this potluck that I'm attending besides the food that I'm eating? Am I also bringing something delicious and helpful to the table? It's important to realize that handprints are multidimensional. There are carbon footprints, so there are carbon handprints. And separate from that is a water footprint. So we separately can think of and pursue and calculate water handprints and so on for each impact category that we have footprints about. Now, I'll come back to this diagram later. It's basically a way of summarizing all the different areas of influence that you can have for creating handprints, and the footprints are just shown in the white, but the handprint potential is basically all of the blue regions. That's one way to think about it, and I've got some cases that we can look at here from a jeans manufacturer, how they can create handprints in all of those zones of influence. Another way to think of it is to come back here to this list that we saw in the beginning. And if the product itself creates some environmental benefits, we say, well, that's part of the function. If the product's reducing emissions relative to the most likely alternative, that's called an avoided emission, and we're starting to see guidance for how to talk about your avoided emissions separate from your footprint. If your product influences the life cycle of other products already in place, like the air curtain reduces the building energy, maybe that's reflected in the function, but I would say it's just invisible at this point in today's footprint reporting. If you sponsor beneficial investment, let's say in your supply chain, you sponsor renewable energy installed by your suppliers. Part of that reduces your footprint, but the rest of it is just missing from your footprint calculation. And sometimes we're calling some of these impacts insetting, but many of them are not even included in insetting. And then finally, there's the whole area of beyond value chain mitigation. When companies, let's say, plant trees or install solar or take other actions that are highly beneficial. All of these together are called handprints. This whole scope of action here is in the scope of handprints. So in concluding, I would say that footprints are true, that we do have footprint impacts, but they're not the whole story, thankfully. We can also give more than we take. We can bring more to the banquet than we eat. And our thriving, ultimately, what this means is we can be net positive. We can be net beneficial. And it means that us doing more of the good things we do can actually promote others thriving as well. So with that, I'm happy to open it up for hopefully a wide-ranging discussion.
Thank you, Greg. You give us a lot of input for the conversation. Sorry, due to the initial problem I had with connection, I forgot to say that this is the fourth event that Equilibrium organized within the London Climate Action Week. That's an important week, stimulating a lot of the positive action to try to connect with your presentation in relation to climate change. So I already have some question, but I want to ask if somebody already want to comment or to ask something to Greg? Okay, so my responsibility is to break the ice as usual. And Greg, so in some way the footprint, the image of the footprint is our weight on the beach. Where how we are weight in terms of our dimension. The idea of the handprint is somebody doing something. No, this is the positive view. But this is the clear differentiation between the negative and the positive. But why is so important to work even with the handprint? Because in some way, the company could be manage their activity even considering only the negative perspective, how to reduce the negative impact.
Yes, thank you, Daniele. I think it's always important to stress that handprints are something that we add to the conversation. We definitely don't want to change the subject from footprints to handprints. It's instead we're expanding the scope of consideration. We're helping people realize that yes, reducing our footprints is essential, but it's actually also a limited view of what you're capable of. And this actually first appeared to me when I realized early in my career as doing life cycle assessments and carbon footprints and also trying to live a sustainable life myself, I realized pretty early that while even even riding my bike has a footprint, even eating a vegetarian meal still has a footprint, even living in a house with a cold thermostat set very low in the winter, and it's I still have a footprint. In fact, living as a North American citizen, we have very large footprints on average, unfortunately. And I realized I'd never get my footprint to zero. So the net conclusion had to be that the planet would be better off without me. And I asked myself, how could I change that? And I had to find ways to take action outside the scope of my footprint. And luckily, I was an LCA consultant, and I said, well, if I help a company, I was working for Caterpillar at the time. So I said, if I could help Caterpillar actually create a more environmentally friendly bulldozer, that would be a benefit for the planet much larger than essentially the cost of keeping me alive here for a year. And then I realized you don't have to be an LCA consultant to create handprints. Anybody can, there's a million ways that we can all take creative actions to help others reduce their footprints or take beneficial environmental actions, like I said, planting trees, cleaning up beaches, restoring habitats. There's an infinite number. And maybe that's the last point I'll say is that um, as we reduce our footprint, which we again need to do, you tend to get diminishing returns. It gets harder and harder to reduce your footprint, but the human footprint is still huge. And so the area with hand printing, there's no limit to how much benefit you could potentially bring. As long as the human footprint is out of carrying capacity, we need to, there's more room for benefit and there's more room for action.
And
Uh,
sorry if I connect to this point because we have several conversation in relation that the dimension of the handprint is not only a technical dimension, no, because you explain some example that are able to provide some positive input to the system, but it's also a cultural approach, no, a mental approach, because the idea not to have always the scene in our mind that we exist, so we create a footprint, so we are negative per definition, is a negative way of thinking about the life.
oh, yes. It's true, Daniele. It's our sense of ourselves as a species right now. Um, I would have to suggest anyway, is that we're destructive, right? And I've heard this, a professor has written a wonderful book called Braiding Sweetgrass. She says that when she asks her students, um, how do humans hurt the environment? They've all got lots of examples. And then she says, how do humans help the environment? And it's silent. No one has any examples. We think of ourselves as destroyers of the planet, and you can't, I don't think we're going to be very effective at being beneficial and healers of the planet until we see that we can be. And
Yeah.
so it's true that the sense of what's possible, it really expands when you add handprints.
And also the possibility to become viral, not to contaminate other people, because the
Mhm.
positive pushing is something that can be easily spread out, because you become part of a community, you become part of a project, an idea of improvement.
That's true, Daniele. That's another key point, isn't it? Footprints perhaps reflect our sort of focus on ourselves, an individualistic perspective, right? We look at, well, what have I done, and how, and we take responsibility, importantly, for the damage that we co-cause. To create a handprint, you have to engage with other people and other organizations. They tend to almost necessarily involve collaboration, and you can't really do it alone, and but so as you say, that's another important piece of the handprint idea. I would say that an additional one is that it expands our scope of responsibility or accountability as well. Because it's important to realize handprints offer the possibility for positive impact, and that's what we've talked about here today. But handprints could also be negative. It could be damaging. You could have impacts outside the scope of your footprint, which are also negative.
Yeah.
You know, a company could, for example, do lobbying to reduce the effectiveness of environmental regulations. You know, and that effect is negative. It's maybe outside of their footprint, most of it.
Yes, think about the lobby of the fossil fuel industry in the past decades, no? How was
Yeah.
negative handprint what they have done? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Any question or comment from somebody else? Because Greg,
Hi, yes.
okay,
This is Malcolm in London. Thank you. This was a really nice session so far. Thank you. I enjoyed the tea. Personally, my philosophy completely agrees with what you're talking about here, Greg. That need that we celebrate the positive and the benefit, not just concentrate on the sin. I think, as you put it, Daniele. And you mentioned that there's some analysis and guidelines coming out. Do they talk about the possibility that this could be misused and become greenwashing, like people overclaiming what their avoided emissions might be, or overclaiming the true extent of what that piece of the graph?
Yes, so important, Malcolm. Thank you. Yes, handprinting can and has been misused. It can be misused and it has been misused. And we've identified some of the ways that misuse can occur. Most likely, the biggest way is to essentially compare what's happening with some ridiculous hypothetical that's not the most likely alternative. I've had people, suggest things like, well, the world uses our computers to we sell computers, and so the world uses our computers to invent vaccines or to design wind turbines. Well, true. But of course, the world is also using your computers to do lots of other harmful things. And so, you shouldn't imagine, I mean, there the hypothetical is the person would sit at their desk without a computer, but that's not a reasonable hypothetical. We have to say, how is your computer changing the world relative to what they would otherwise have purchased or done?
yes,
So getting the hypotheticals, getting the baseline, making it realistic is really one way to filter out a lot of claims that are kind of ridiculous. I do think, though, that there's something instructive for us to see in even those ridiculous claims. It comes back to this idea that, well, what's the function of my product? The computer manufacturer is indeed serving a need. And I think people want to be appreciated. Individuals and organizations want to be appreciated for the good that they're bringing. And that's a help. And there's lots of psychological research that shows, and I've experienced this personally in talks, where if you show people some appreciation for the good that they either are or could do, then they're more willing to admit that they also cause harm. I had a speaker, a participant in a workshop once say, when you told us about our footprints and that, the world might be better off without us, I wasn't buying it. But then you told us that we had a handprint too, potentially. And now that I see that you allow I could do good, I'm willing to accept that I do also cause harm. So we could actually get people to own or admit their footprints more with the presence of the handprint. One other point I'll make to you, your great question, Malcolm, is that if we ask companies, and we even require in some sense, that if you're going to speak about your handprint, you need to also speak about your footprint, then And then you actually can reduce some kinds of greenwashing, because right now what companies will sometimes do is say, we do good things. Look, we planted lots of trees, or we funded these solar panels, and it's out of context. We don't know how big the solar panel impact is, or the tree impact is, compared to the footprint. But if we call on people to report them both side by side, then we can find out, is this handprint really significant compared to the footprint or not?
And Greg, you mentioned the key word in relation to greenwashing is the baseline you mentioned before, no? Because
Yeah.
we move to the technical discussion. Obviously, the benefit in terms of avoided emission, that is one of the dimension of the handprint. The quantification of avoided emission is based on the comparison with the baseline. So the baseline is really one of the most critical aspects when you quantify the handprint for sure.
Yes.
And I saw was Gianpaolo asking from the floor.
Only a simple question. May I see your approach something to break the border between the single system and see the whole system? I like epistemology, so to me is quite frustrating to see that single company, single product, single organization measure something that seems is isolated from the context. Your approach, I think, help a lot to consider the whole system. I think.
Thank you very much, Gianpaolo. That's the intention, isn't it? Is to, and I guess this, as an epistemologist, you're, I'm sure, very more aware than most of us that when we try to understand something, especially when we try to model it, try to analyze it, we usually we extract it from the rest of the world and the system, and we try to analyze this little piece. But as you say, pieces are always in real life interacting with the whole, with so many other pieces. And yes, I do think that handprints tries to say essentially, thank you for those footprint accounts. Thank you for the footprint estimates. They're important, but they're missing some other important interactions that either the product or the person or the organization is having in the world. And let's open our eyes as broadly as we can. What it also does is it opens our eyes to new ways that we can and are already affecting the climate. For example, designing for ripple effects, designing to intentionally create a kind of positive cascade of causation. You wouldn't see this if you just look at, reducing your footprint.
Yeah. So next step, Greg, what we can expect for handprint to conclude, because the time is running very fast.
Well, so Daniele has played a very important role at helping some of us internationally to start to propose a potential ISO standard for handprints. I think that's going to be a big job, and we don't have approval yet for a project to do so in ISO, but we're trying to work towards such a thing. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development, it continues to advance their avoided emissions. As we've seen here, and I think that's great, by the way, the avoided emission progress is critical. I hope that we can get more practical examples of case studies of these other kinds of handprints too, so that people will realize that avoided emissions are important, they're valuable, and there are additional ways to create handprints. And my hope, Daniele, the dream for me, in answer to your question, is that we quickly reframe ourselves as a healing species. We say that's what we want to be. We want to be a healing force on this planet, and we we pursue that as rigorously, as energetically as we can.
So I think that this was really the most interesting, positive view at the conclusion of our Tea Corner. And so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Greg, in particular, for your presentation. And so we will have the next Tea Corner, the 22nd of July. And we touch again at the point that ISO standard need to be freely available. As you know, we are doing a campaign in this direction because we believe that it's an important, very important topic. So you are all invited at the 22nd of July to drink a cup of tea together and to spend 30 minutes to have a conversation. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everybody.